You are listening to Autistic Stuff for Autistic People, a podcast in which a few autistic friends talk about their lived experiences and special interests. We are here to invite you into our world as autistic peers sharing relatable conversations about life as autistic people. This podcast is for autistic people and anyone that lives with, works with, or loves an autistic person. I am Aradia. I am the creatively autistic coach and also the podcast producer for Fox and Raven Media.
And I am Cheryl. I'm a peer support coach and body talk practitioner who works with other late identified autistic adults to better understand their needs, challenges, strengths, and unique wiring to live with more grace and compassion.
And I'm Patrice, and I'm an internal family systems informed practitioner, and I work with autistic women and members of the Irish diaspora.
Welcome back to another episode of Autistic Stuff for Autistic People. Today, we are going to talk about a topic that is a continuation of what we talked about last time. Last episode, we talked about the experience of self-identification and formal diagnosis. And this episode, we want to talk about how that affects our relationships once the initial fanfare has passed. How do our relationships have to change, for good or otherwise? What does coming out as autistic over and over again feel like at work, with our families, and with strangers? This episode felt necessary to us after what we talked about last time, because that whole experience of identifying as autistic and coming to terms with what that means in whatever way that happens for you, that is only the beginning. That is just the very first step of going through the rest of your life with this information. Sometimes the hardest parts of an autism realization are in the ongoing negotiations for accommodations that you hadn't utilized before, and finding new boundaries that have to be held with a new fervor, and looking back at old interactions with new eyes. So, today, let's talk about how that has gone for us so far.
Well, for me, I would say that in the beginning, I felt really excited about the realization that I was autistic, and I told many people pretty openly, and there were other people I didn't tell and still haven't told. I kind of felt into how comfortable I felt at the time. But I would say since then, I've really dialed that back, and now I'm a lot more subtle in the ways I talk about it, and there's really degrees of disclosure that I probably employ. And, even this weekend, I was at a wellness and yoga festival, which was very fun, but I'm very tired today. So I noticed during the day with the person I was with, I would often say, this is an example of it's really loud in here. And so I'm getting really tired. Could we leave and go somewhere else? And instead of, in the early days, I might have been like, my autism can't accept this. I'm just kind of getting really granular and specific around the ways I'm being affected and I'm feeling. And I find that works pretty well with people. When I say things like, sometimes I've got some, social anxiety, so I might not want to do this. Or, really loud restaurants are really hard on me. Could we make a different plan? So that's one way I would say kind of the conversations evolved. Whereas in the beginning, I was like, I'm autistic. Here's a list of what you should and should not say to me. Educate yourself. And, I have a lot of compassion for where I was at that point in the process too. But I wouldn't say that really went over well. I found I had a real vulnerability hangover after disclosing that much. So I'm finding, this kind of granular level of, I'm noticing I'm having some pain in this moment. Here's a little bit about why. Could we do something different? Works really well for me in the moment.
That makes so much sense. Yeah, because let's see, I feel like, so when I was a kid, my mom got diagnosed. And so she was going through that, explaining everything in terms of, well, I learned this about my autism and it affects me this way. So I was absorbing that from her. And then I kind of went straight to where you're at now. As a younger kid, I just was like, well, I need sunglasses, or like, I can't drive. Just like everything goes too fast. And I never felt like I had the right to use diagnostic words for it. But also I just was learning from my mom, like, just go straight to the part that matters. It doesn't really matter why it's all too fast for me. What matters is that it's too fast. It doesn't matter why I have a headache. It matters that I know how to not have a headache. So I was doing a bunch of like accommodations for myself and not explaining it for a long time. And then I come around to my autism, like, revelation where I'm like, oh, that's why. And now I'm in that state of telling everyone, well, I'm autistic, and so blah, 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 blah. It's like I'm doing it in reverse. But I'm also doing it in the context of like, being a coach and like having done this education, and now it's like kind of this job path I'm doing. So it's like, no, this is actually part of what I'm supposed to be doing, is being really like out there with the labels and stuff and like drawing people in with that. But I really do think there's what you're talking about with the vulnerability hangover, like not feeling the need to explain in order to justify, right? I'm out here explaining because I want to draw people in like a circus barker with cool factoids. It's not because I feel like I have to justify myself. And I think that's really helpful. I see a lot of people justifying themselves in ways that are clearly draining. Like I can see their health bar going down as they justify themselves. I'm like, no, just tell me what the end result is. I don't need all of that. And I think that's an important part of how relationships change, right? If you feel you have to justify yourself or not. That's been a big part of what I've been letting go of. Yes, I've been good at doing some accommodations, but also so much justification that I have to let go of.
Yeah, it seems as we become more accepting of what our needs are, the need to justify them to others perhaps becomes less urgent. It's really interesting too, Aradia, you've been in this conversation your whole life, it sounds like. And so you've almost had like the inverse experience to someone who is late discovered or late diagnosed. You had early exposure to accommodation requests.
Very weirdly unicorn-like.
Yeah.
This has been very eye-opening, actually, listening to this part of the conversation. I don't think I even realized how much I've been justifying accommodation requests, not just to other people, but to myself, right? The bulk of this conversation is going to focus on our relationship with other people, but there is that piece of relationship with self after understanding our autism, right? Because I've spent the bulk of my 4+ decades on this planet really navigating how do we solve the problem of competing needs in a relationship, and why does it feel like other people's needs would be more important than mine, right? And then if I kind of put myself lower, then there's that aspect of, well, if I really have a need and it's really important, then I need to have a story behind it, right? Somebody asks you to do something and you don't have the capacity, you don't have the spoons. I am still not quite there in most situations of being able to say, I'm sorry, I can't do that, right? I often feel like I still need to really give a backstory, give an explanation, to kind of keep the peace or to keep other people happy. So I think that's something, when it comes to setting boundaries or working with competing needs, or even just being able to identify and acknowledge our needs to ourselves and then bring that into a relationship. Depending on our history and our personalities and our experiences, it's going to be easier sometimes more than others. And it's been 3 years now for me. I just had my 3-year anniversary a couple weeks ago. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've learned so much and I still have so much to learn.
Mm-hmm. And congratulations, Cheryl. And it is definitely a journey that just keeps unfolding for me anyway. You're touching on that part of us that wants to please others. That's been such a huge part of my own journey as well. So I've been for a long time thinking about how, just being socialized as a girl and a woman, we are socialized to accommodate and prioritize others anyway, and to, be serving of others. And then having experienced trauma, pleasing and fawning, that's a pretty typical response. I hadn't considered until very recently how, because I didn't know about autism. And we now know, often there's this gap if you're the only person who's not neurotypical or allistic in a group. There's this gap of different communication styles, different presentations. So I'm now understanding that subconsciously, in order to bridge that gap, the part of me who pleases others would step in, give a compliment, offer to do a thing, offer to be helpful. And here I am bridging the gap to create some sense of connection. But then the connection's coming from me giving energy, the other person enjoying it and perhaps wanting more. And so this is now a house of cards that's going to crumble in a state of extreme burnout. So I hadn't put that together till recently, that people pleasing was a strategy I used to get connection, to bridge a gap because I didn't understand that I truly was operating from a different kind of system than others and most environments I was in. So as I've gotten to know this part of me that pleases others and understood what it's doing, and now it's kind of relaxing a bit, I don't have as many interactions because I'm not reaching out to bridge that gap as often. And I'm more, I suppose I would say, self-contained. My my connections with others are fewer but richer, and also more authentic and more grounded in what my needs actually are. So there's less quantity, but I'd say higher quality in relationships at this point.
Hmm. Did either of you lose relationships?
Yes. Yes, I've lost several where it was just really apparent that the relationship was constructed by me giving a lot of energy and the other person expecting a lot of that energy and not being able to work through that. I then pulled away from those relationships. And I wonder if at some point in the future, if I feel more resourced, I would revisit and explain what happened from my point of view. I'm not there yet. I also want to add one thing I've noticed. I live in an apartment complex. I noticed once I got into some burnout, I became very, not friendly proactively with my neighbors, and then felt very bad about that. There's a part of me that really wants to be the kind of neighbor where someone moves in and I bake them like a banana bread or something and welcome them to the community and want to go for walks with them and their dog. And I just know I don't have the capacity to do that. So I've needed to spend time with the part of me that wants it to be different, wants to keep up, wants to be the neighbor that everybody loves, the friend that everybody loves. And there's real grief in sitting with not being able to keep up and not being able to get in sync with everybody, and wishing it were different, wishing I didn't have the limitations and limited capacity that I do. So I've been making time for that grief in this journey too.
I think for me, it's been less that I've lost relationships and more that I've lost a lot of opportunities for relationships that I would have ultimately lost. I've just have been so self-protective to the point of maybe being overly interior. I've had very few friendships and connections, and almost all of them have been really deep and good and long lasting. I just really have not had a lot of relationships to lose. And those have been generally formed on the basis of people who have gathered around some kind of being the weirdos, the black sheep, the odd birds, for reasons, I guess. I just keep rolling a natural 20 on that and ending up in a place where those are the main people I'm hanging out with. But that then means that as I've gone through my unmasking journey, I'm the only relationships I have to lose are the important ones. I have nothing that isn't very high stakes. And that made my unmasking journey really, really hard because I'm my entire support network, everyone who I know and love and who cares about me and takes care of me, those few people all know this very specific form of me. And what if they reject my more unmasked self? I have nothing. I have no one to rely on if that doesn't work. And there was not good reason to think that because, again, they had all come into my life through the collection of weirdos taking care of themselves and making alternative community. It's all gone very, very well. The sky has not fallen. In fact, it has opened up tremendously. But the absolute terror of being I have cultivated a life with very few relationships on the basis of this one presentation. And if I want to explore something, is this a house of cards? I don't think it is, but what if it is? It hasn't been. It's been great. I literally just the other day, my husband was telling me because I had apologized to him we went into a restaurant and it was one of those places where you have to make 1,000 decisions in order for them to feed you. And I just wanted some freaking food. And I was I didn't expect this to be local Subway or whatever. And he just, guided me on out. And I was I'm sorry that I can't do that. And he's it's so much greater that that you can't do that. It's easier for you to recover and go on to the next restaurant and figure out something else to do because of that. And I'm I feel I should have greater capacity because I'm taking care of myself. And he's no, you have the capacity you have, but you're so much less cranky about it. And again, it's like, I was like, what if I'm less functional and he's mad about that? And he's like, no, you're so much easier to get along with. Like, oh, again, the sky didn't fall. The sky opened up.
I love that both of you are talking about honesty right now. I feel like that's a big thing that you're both mentioning. The power of that.
Yeah, and in this case, Aradia, you're talking about honesty leading to increased connection with loved ones, and that's really beautiful that happened. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I love that you really named, too, how scary it can be to show up differently to people who've gotten to know us a certain way.
It's easier with strangers to start out on a new foot and be like, yeah, I'm autistic, I'm ADHD, I do this, that, and the other. But someone who's known you for 15 years, it's like, ugh.
It is.
I think that comment is really important, that Patrice, that you just made about what Aradia just said about honesty leading to greater connection. And I think it's really important to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that sometimes when we're honest, it is going to have that effect on those relationships we have cultivated and that are really meaningful to us. And that other times they lead in the opposite direction. They lead to fractures. They lead to the loss of relationships that are actually really very important to us. And I've had both experiences. So, for example, I found out 3 years ago I'm autistic. So I've never had a lot of friends. I've always had friends that are very situational. So I can walk into a new situation, traveling, volunteering, working, and I can connect and I can, make those relationships that are, healthy based on respect. We have a lot of fun. But as soon as that situation is over, it falls away. I felt very guilty for a lot of years for not being the type of person that heavily invests and, keeps going and texts all the time and gets together. And like, I've never had the capacity. And with the ADHD piece, like, if they're not in front of me, I don't really think about them. And when I say that out loud, some people get really offended, and it's like, well, I love you to death. And if you came right back into my, in front of me right now, we'd pick up where we left off. And that's great. But I think understanding about my autism has definitely lessened the guilt around that. I understand my capacity. I understand my reasons. I understand that I'm always going to be the type of person that has a core group. And that is plenty for me. And it's meaningful to me. Exactly what you were saying, Aradia. But after I started disclosing, I had a few very different reactions. Right? In the beginning stages, it was, to certain friends and colleagues, what we've talked about in previous episodes, you must be high functioning, you don't look autistic, right? You get all of those things out of the way. And then, the people that I've worked closer to, especially colleagues that I'd worked with for years, I had some really good conversations. They were listening respectfully, asking me questions. Some of them still had some disbelief, like, but you're a great teacher and you can speak well. And it's like, there's that element of how much is my responsibility to educate in these scenarios, and how much do I just simply let them observe, ask questions, and do their own research, right? So definitely over the years, pulling back on the education piece, letting people come to things in their own time, and just maybe pointing people in the right direction without thinking it's my job to help them complete a thesis on, autism understanding. But it was my family, I think, that has, obviously had the greatest impact on me, mostly for the fact that, I come from a large family. I have 5 siblings. I have a mother and I have 10 nieces and nephews. And so my family is my community, right? In addition to obviously the larger autistic community online. But there was 2 very separate reactions after I disclosed. Some of my immediate family members were so understanding and so present, and they started their own journey of research and deep dives and asking me questions. And some of them are, looking into their own neurodivergence, or their partners or their children, right? And it made me feel so seen and so supported, and it deepened our relationship because I'm showing up much more authentically. They're understanding where I'm coming from in a way that, they never had before. And I've really seen that those relationships grow over the past 3 years, right? On the other hand, I've had a couple siblings who, after my initial disclosure, they haven't spoken about it in 3 years. They haven't asked one question. They haven't said a word. And so it's such a huge part of me. Like it is me. It's who I am. It's how I see the world. It's how I interact with the world. It's my wiring. And so there is that element of, even within certain family relationships, I don't feel comfortable or safe unmasking fully or showing up authentically. And even, a really good friend who, like I said, I don't have a lot of friends, but I had one really good friend, and, when a lot of stuff was going on with RFK and coming out with a lot of comments, and especially about vaccines, and seeing some of the things that she was writing online, that impacts relationships as well. Once people know who you are and then continue to show up in a way that is against your entire community, right? You can't say they didn't know anymore, right? So I think all of those things have definitely impacted my relationships and sense of self, but also strengthened that sense of self because, it's forced me to go deeper to know who I am.
Thanks, Cheryl. And I'm sorry you've had some more challenging experiences, and I'm really glad that you've had some connecting ones, and it really is true. You don't know what's going to happen when you start disclosing. We can't control how another person responds to us. So much of our masking is about trying to control other people's perceptions of us. So when we disclose, we're really doing the opposite of that. We're having to face our fears of what happens if I'm really myself. Is it okay to be me? What if it's scary? What if it's sad to be me? Can I be with the grief? Can I be with the fear? It's really deep stuff comes up.
And it's not in a binary. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of people maybe assume. It's like, oh, you've been masking your whole life, you find out you're autistic, and then, you learn how to unmask. But it's really, like, I can only speak from my own experience, but for me, it is so not that. It is in degrees, and it is in situations, and it is with certain people and sense of safety. And, there's so many different variables, and it doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong if you still feel that you need to mask in certain situations, right? There is so many things when it comes to, systemic barriers and different, marginalized identities and positions we hold in society. And there's just some places that are still not safe, right? I mean, we have more safety than most, right? As white people, but there are still so many places that it's not going to feel fully safe to your nervous system to unmask. And that's why, those degrees, and really understanding that some environments you might never be able to unmask, and bringing grace to that for yourself, and not listening to all the outside noise that says masking bad, unmasking good. Right? There's some gray areas there that I think really have to be explored in greater depth.
Yeah, we can also have those internal voices too telling us, oh, I should be unmasking now. I should be able to be beyond this masking tendency. And yeah, in myself, I listen to those shoulds, and, I really understand where they're coming from. And yeah, I try to send some compassionate energy for that urgency that part of me is feeling, but also I'm paying attention to if I'm with a person and I'm feeling any kind of hesitation or resistance to sharing, I want to pay attention to that. I don't want to bypass it. I want to make sure if I'm sharing about myself, I've got some internal consent that all parts of me feel okay with what I'm sharing. And the reality is it's very, very rare that I'm going to feel okay to share everything going on. So that's why sharing, even in just small degrees, is often what my system can handle.
Yeah, I've been in some of my friends and also just like reading around on Reddit on, autism spaces. I've been reading a lot recently about people trying to deal with work, specifically the concept of masking and work, and like, I have to mask in order to keep my job, or once I disclosed, suddenly behaviors that had never been a problem for my employees or for my, coworkers are now a problem. Like, this is a constant refrain. I know someone who's dealing with that personally. And I can tell him, you got to support your nervous system. You got to take care of yourself. Well, I can tell him that all the time. But the fact of the matter is, like, he's really struggling to mask at work and it's causing problems, and me being like, yeah, just take care of your nervous system is like great for me, but like that's not actually, I mean, it's the best advice I've got, but it's I mean, this is why the unmasked, I mean, like you were saying, Cheryl, it's not binary. And disclosing, as Patrice said, like it's not going to be the same. And that's part of what I had in my intro spiel. Like we have to come out over and over and over again, or not. We have to live with not coming out over and over and over again. And to what degree is that going to get accepted? Are we going to get more harassed if we do? Like there's so much safety to it. It's not just the internal, what feels good. It's also like, what can the world tolerate? What can the world even tolerate from us? And that's shitty, but real.
Masking can be very strategic in certain circumstances. We may need to keep our income stable, and there may be real reason to grieve that is what's required of us at certain times in our lives. Yeah.
I think part of the problem around masking or unmasking, one, it's not fully understood because it's become buzzwords online. But the second part of it is, I think some of us have started to equate brutal honesty with unmasking, right? There's this one view or one definition of unmasking, like I'm just going to come on out and say what I want to say and do what I want to do and just tell everybody what's what. And that's unmasking, right? Wear the big t-shirt that says I am autistic, put a sticker on your forehead, whatever. And, for some people that may be a piece of their unmasking journey. It's not the same for everyone, right? If we go back to unmasking being really about how to meet our needs in a healthy way, we may interpret unmasking behaviors a little bit differently. If we go back to our center and say, like, what are my needs in this situation, right? We've just found out we're autistic. We need to maybe, readjust some relationships, or, maybe we want to disclose. What does disclosing actually accomplish in this situation, right? What need am I trying to meet through this disclosure or this accommodation request, right? Let's go back to the root of the actions. And I think that might help us have a different conversation about our relationships and how they're affected, because ultimately we have to know ourselves first, right? And especially at work that is super difficult, right? I was a teacher for years. Many years I didn't know I was autistic, and a couple years that I did. And there is something that part of me, there's that inner battle. You know what? I'm autistic now. I know I'm autistic. I know what my needs are. I'm just going to go in there, guns blazing and tell everybody what's what. I disclosed to my direct supervisor in my department, who was a lovely, lovely woman, and I'd known her for years. And, we had some really great conversations. I never told the managers, like the people above her. I never did, because ultimately, what would have changed by me asking for accommodations as a teacher? Like some industries are different than others, right? They're all different. But for me, I was still going to have to teach the same number of students. I was still going to have to teach the same curriculum. I was still going to have to do the same number of assignments and marking and report cards and administrative duties. There was nothing that was going to be changed other than perhaps, better communication, maybe by email instead of verbal, maybe some tweaks could have happened. And to a certain extent they were, because I told the person directly above me, and she was willing to work with me on that. But in situations where disclosing or trying to get an accommodation, whether it be work or in a personal relationship, if the benefit and the cost, right, if you look at it and go, oh, I'm going to put myself out there, I'm going to disclose, I'm going to be really vulnerable, but the odds of me getting anything in return in terms of accommodations or in terms of a safer work environment or, whatever your goals are, only the individual can really make that determination for themselves. Each person knows their work culture and the environment and the people that they have to report to. And I think one of the biggest things that I tried to do at my job was kind of figure out the difference between masking and like identity management. So, kind of for me, that identity management kind of looked like, well, in my real life, I'm an introvert and I need a lot of time to myself and I need, all those things that introverts are. But in front of a classroom, I'm very outgoing. I'm very, talk with my hands and, I'm going to be getting everyone involved. And I didn't feel like that was masking. I wasn't trying to get a need met in an unhealthy way. I was simply showing up in the way that my students needed me, right? And maybe that seems subtle in its distinction, but for me, it was okay because one, cost benefit analysis I had already done, but two, I didn't feel like that was taking a lot out of me. That part of the job was not exhausting me, right? And so I think ultimately at the end of the day, in any relationship, if you're getting to the end of that time with that person and you go, wow, I am freaking exhausted. I feel like I've given everything and I have nothing left, right? Whatever you call that, masking or not getting your needs met or needing to ask for an accommodation, I don't care how you define it. That's the time to go, I wonder what's up with this relationship. I wonder what needs to get looked at here. Right?
Yeah. I think that question, what can be changed, is such a critical piece of that, because in your relationship with yourself, right? Like, you need to be as honest with yourself as possible, right? That's absolutely like what needs to be changed is honesty. But in your job, it's a lot more complicated. What can be changed realistically? What is worth it? And then, the middle ground of all of your personal relationships. Which relationships need to be changed because they're exhausting, and which relationships is it easier to just continue to do identity management for? Yeah, I was, recently at a wedding and, didn't know half of the family because that's the other side, right? And I was not going to go around being like, hi, I'm not making eye contact with you or shaking your hand because I'm autistic. No, I was just like, I'm going to put on my very social mode for this event because I don't need to manage this relationship, that level of relationship with these people. I'm never going to meet them again. Like, it's fine. But then, hanging out with my side of the family and being like, oh, cool, I can be a little bit weirder because I'm just with us, and like having that be part of it. Like, all of that was what kept the most spoons in my drawer for purposes of getting through that weekend. But again, the people on my side of the family who know I'm autistic are like, yeah, we're getting to hang out like over here and like provide some of that safe space. And now it's part of what we're doing, right? It's not like I'm just stressed on my own. It's now we're all over here chilling out and not dealing with those people from the other side. I don't know. I think in an ideal world, the information can be used to help bind the family together, to help bind a friend group together. Like, if you know that you're coalescing around, none of us like scents, we're going to make a scent-free gathering, that you get community from that. You get solidarity. You get confidence to go out into your life and be like, I need to change something else. I think it's not just about what we put out into relationships. The relationships change us too, when you can bring some of your needs and identity and honesty into it. Like, like we were saying earlier, connection. You can get connection from people and make it more than the sum of its parts, ideally.
And that can actually give energy. And as we say, spoons too.
Give energy.
Yeah. I was at this yoga and wellness thing on Saturday all day. And the person I was with was like, I'm surprised you made it all day. And that really opened up an opportunity to have a conversation about what kinds of things give me energy versus what kinds of things don't. And, in this day, we'd gone to a couple of dance classes, and the teacher actually said during one, this is not about performance. It is about connection. And just that invitation to show up honestly, to leave the room and have water when I needed a break, to not care about what it looked like. I got so much energy from being in such an environment where there were no demands, where I could just show up where I wanted to be. And I was able to then describe that versus when I go to work and I have to basically perform a role and worried about power dynamics, social subtleties that I'm not necessarily being able to pick up on, how draining that is. I wanted to add that in the last few years, learning about autism, even when something is draining, to be able to acknowledge to myself that it's draining and to understand why and that it makes sense that it's draining has been a huge boost to my quality of life. Because before that, I thought something was just wrong with me and I just couldn't keep up. And it was a low grade source of anxiety all the time. So, for example, socializing used to involve a lot of going to potluck dinners, which in this area, I remember once we told Matthew about this, he didn't know what a potluck dinner was. So, for anyone in the audience, a potluck is where you make a dish or buy it and bring it to the party. For me, by the time I've even thought about what to bring, I'm out of spoons. Like, never mind, like, go to the grocery store, like, make something. I don't make things. I don't prepare food for one person, never mind, like, 12 people. But I would have so much anxiety. Inevitably, I'd end up buying like 30 cookies at a bakery and like feel resentful about even the cost of that. Then I'd feel self-conscious that I'm bringing something when everyone else made something. And I just don't go to potlucks anymore. And it is just so freeing to just acknowledge that this is not a way I can relate to others. It is, the cost is way too high. Even just small realizations like that over the years have really evolved the way I'm able to relate to people. And that's given me a lot more sense that I have more agency and control over the energy flow in and out.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's so powerful to, well, first of all, just your realizations, Patrice, but also just to highlight that our relationships and the way they were affected after we learned we were autistic, versus now, however many years that you've kind of been doing your inner work and learning to understand yourself and your needs, like you're able to show up in a different way now than you were when you first discovered, your autism. And I think, for anyone listening and wondering, I've just learned I'm autistic, do I go around disclosing to people? It's okay if you don't do it perfectly, or it's okay if there's some fallout. It's okay if you kind of kick yourself later and say, why did I say it that way? Like, you are going to, fall down and get back up. And the more you learn about yourself and your needs and your strengths and your challenges and your unique wiring, you are going to change. And as we change, our relationships have no choice but to change or fall away, depending on what's needed. Yeah, you have a choice. You can look back and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did it that way at the beginning. Or you're like, oh wow, look how much more I know myself now. Like, how amazing is that? Like, how far have we come? And how much more of a relationship, do we have with ourselves? Right? I'm able to show up way more real with myself, even though I still struggle with, boundaries and saying no and people pleasing. I haven't arrived by any stretch of the imagination. There's definitely more times than ever before where I'll notice right away, if I've got something internally and I go, oh, do I really want to be in that situation? Do I really want to be, in that relationship? Do I really want to commit to that? Right? There's more of an awareness of what's going on in my mind, in my body, in my spirit. And whether I act on it, in the way that my intuition is telling me to, that's always a fun, flip of the coin. But I'm definitely noticing more, I'm observing more, I'm connecting more, I'm feeling more, and, just being more honest with myself. And I think that's really powerful when it comes to relationships.
Yeah, and I think too it's worth emphasizing that much like unmasking is not a binary, like disclosing in a relationship is not a binary. It's not like you suddenly switch into a new mode and this is how it is now. Like, it's a feedback loop, it's a sine wave, it's progress, which is not linear. Like, it changes. The relationship changes you change the relationship. And as you disclose one thing and, unpack something, then you get to unveil the next layer. It's like every other part of this journey. It's all the same thing. But I think it's, not all relationships are going to change in a bad way. Some of them are going to end up like helping accelerate your own process with yourself. Certainly working with my most intimate family members to better take care of my needs opens up my capacity to realize what other needs are or what other capacities I have once I free up energy from worrying about one thing. Suddenly I'm into doing something else. And there's this whole, I wasn't going to discover that just navel gazing. I needed to bring that into a relationship with another person in order to have that new progress for myself. And yeah, it's scary. It's really scary and it can be risky and dangerous, but especially with the people that you're sharing the most intimate parts of your life with, your resources, your intellectual headspace, like if you can't have that dynamic with them, like, I don't know, what are you preserving?
Mm-hmm. And in some ways, this kind of connects back to one of the earlier episodes we did on community.
Yeah.
And I think a couple things really do tie together and bear repeating that, first things first, if you've discovered you're autistic, whether it be late in life or whatever age you are, one of the things that we often recommend is, finding fellow autistics to be in community with, whether that be in person or online, with the caveat that just because it says it's an autistic community doesn't automatically mean that it's going to be that perfectly safe place and, perfect fit for you. And that can take some trial and error because, many of us aren't really in touch with our intuition. It takes some time. But yeah, that community of fellow autistic people can be so powerful because there is less masking. There is less, forcing ourselves to be in, shapes and boxes that maybe we were never meant to be in. And I think the other piece too that might be important in all of this is when you find out you're autistic and you start to disclose, to friends, to family, to colleagues, right? A lot of times you're disclosing to neurotypical people. But another important conversation is, what about when you're disclosing to other autistic people and you're in relationship with an autistic person? Maybe your partner is also autistic, but maybe, your autism doesn't show up the same. Maybe you have very competing needs as autistic people. Maybe you have different levels of ability or support needs, right? Maybe you have, I've worked with some people who they're both autistic, but one is a person of color and one is white, right? So you both have the neurodivergent piece, you have the autistic piece, but you have very different levels of privilege, right? So what happens in those kinds of relationships, right? How do you still continue to get your needs met, right? A lot of this is a lot of trial and error, a lot of open and honest communication, and a lot of grace and compassion for self and person across from us.
Yeah. The dynamic learning experience for everyone. And there we have it. An honest and varied discussion around relationships after an autism realization, which strayed into the diverging territories of rejection versus understanding from our friends and family, demands versus invitations in our relationships with others, and just really helped me appreciate how lucky I've been with the relationships I have had through the last few years of my autistic journey. We can't control how others respond, but we do have to live with the knowledge of who we are. As a reminder, we are all peer support coaches within the Autistic Peer Support Coaching Collective, offering a variety of free and paid intentionally autistic spaces. You can learn more and follow us at our website, autisticcoaches.com. You can support us by sharing the podcast with your friends, peers, and anyone who lives with, works with, or loves an autistic person. Thank you for listening to us talking about autistic stuff for autistic people. New episodes come out on alternating Mondays. Keep the conversation going on our Blue Sky feed or send us your constructive comments and feedback via email at autisticstuffpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, remember that it's okay for relationships to change in light of new information about yourself. Autistic Stuff for Autistic People is a production of Fox and Draven Media. For more podcasts from Fox and Draven Media, visit our website, foxanddravenmedia.com.